Hi, everybody, and welcome back to EBNet Stream. We recently published an article from Niki Giles, who's the head of strategy at Prescient Fund Services, around the importance of umbrella funds and the role that they can play in an employer's EVP. I thought I'd catch up with Niki today and discuss some of her thoughts around this topic. So, Niki, welcome to EBNet Stream.
Hi, Natalie. Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. I think let's jump into the topic by starting with the obligation of an employer to provide benefits for their employees or their staff.
Okay, so obviously, an employee value proposition isn't just providing retirement benefits. It's what the employer is bringing to the employee. The employee is obviously bringing their time and their efforts, and how are they being rewarded for that? And part of that employee value proposition could potentially be, how is the employer making retirement funding or savings available to the employee? So it's part of the employee value proposition, not the entire thing, but an important part. Because I think in this day and age, we need to ensure that our employees are saving for their retirement. And as an employer, you're in the best position to be able to offer them, what they should be using and needing in order to save for later on in life.
And as far as I understand it, the employer has two options in a way to kind of convey these types of retirement and other benefits to their staff. One really being a standalone fund and one really being an umbrella fund. Without going into too much of the detail, why would an employer choose an umbrella fund?
So I think an umbrella fund initially was very useful for employers who only had a few number of employees potentially, and the costs of having a standalone fund for those employers was just too prohibitive. I think as things have progressed and as regulation has changed and the regulatory burden has increased, even those medium-sized employers who had their own standalone funds are finding the regulatory cost and burden of those to be quite excessive, and are looking now for alternatives such as an umbrella fund to be able to put their employees into, so they don't have that regulatory and administrative burden placed on them. And you're seeing some seriously large employers also looking to umbrella funds. And so the industry is consolidating from a large number of standalones, possibly about 10 to 15 years ago, to a much smaller number, and some significant umbrella funds who are consolidating in the industry.
And a question I've always wanted to know the answer to: who decides to go into an umbrella fund? Is it the employer or is it the standalone fund's board of trustees?
Well, ultimately, for a standalone fund, their employer will be the sponsor for that fund. And oftentimes the employer, especially if it's a small fund, will be funding some of the costs. So the employer, together with the trustees of that standalone, would be making the decision, and the employer will have representation on the trustee body with the employees. And I think together with the trustees, the employer is going to be making that decision to close down that standalone fund and move it across into an umbrella fund.
Okay, so now we belong to an umbrella fund. We're participating in a fund that already exists in the industry with a number of unrelated other participating employers. What should I look for when I choose the fund that I go into?
I think that's an important question for employers. And I think, not all employers are financial services gurus. They don't always understand exactly what's on offer. And there's quite a lot of ambiguity around different offerings that these umbrella funds offer. Fees are complex. There's a lot of different types of fees. There's a lot of different investment options that are available to them. So as an employer, I think oftentimes it's quite useful to have some form of advisor who's advising you on what to look for in an umbrella fund, because what you need to be able to do is match what the umbrella fund is providing you with the type of employee that you've got. So not every umbrella fund is going to fit your employee. You're going to have either blue collar workers, you're going to have white collar workers, you're going to have, employees who are more sophisticated when they're investing and being able to make more decisions for themselves in what they want to invest into, versus other employees who really just want to be able to save, and somebody else is taking care of where that money is going into. So I think it's important that an employer maybe reaches out to somebody in the financial services arena, such as an employee benefits consultant, to assist them in making that decision of what umbrella fund is right for them. Because there's not one size fits all.
Sure. And aside from the kind of matching of the fund's provisions with my employees' needs, what other types of questions should I be asking of an umbrella fund provider if, say, for example, I had 3 or 5 of them presenting at my trustee meeting one day?
I mean, fees are always going to be important. So you definitely want to know what is it going to cost your member at the end of the day. So, and how are those fees broken down? And what is it going to cost your lowest contributor versus what is it going to cost your highest contributor? Because, you don't want the lowest contributor being charged excessive fees, but the highest contributor is paying a small set fee, for instance. Another thing is what access to what savings products are within that umbrella fund. So what are the underlying investments that can be accessed? Who are the trustees? What is their background? What is their governance like? Maybe even, reviewing whether or not they're up to date with their submissions to the FSCA on financials, for instance. So I think there's a lot of different types of questions you can be asking, right from a governance side through to an investments perspective. And it's also going to depend on who's the sponsor to those umbrella funds. Is there sufficient backing? Who's administering it? What kind of access are your employees going to get to information on an ongoing basis? But a lot of this is going to depend on your employee base as well. Some employees don't want to access things. They just want to know a statement on an annual basis, and when they retire, how much they can take. I do think, though, that the environment is changing. Two-Pot has introduced a lot more complexity into umbrella funds. It's no longer a long-term savings thing that you kind of put a little bit of money away to on a monthly basis, and at the end of your employment, whether you're resigning or retiring, you kind of look at this and see what you're going to do with it. Employees are now accessing this information a lot more regularly because they wanted to see what they can take out. And so it's becoming a little bit more retail orientated as well.
Yes. Yeah. Such a good description of the kind of melting of retail and institutional into one space now. While you were talking, I was thinking about this concept of outsourcing this governance burden. So I want to provide benefits for my staff. I'm outsourcing this governance burden, and really that's the box ticked on that aspect of my EVP. Is there a responsibility or a need, is a better word, is there a need for an employer to be monitoring, or a management committee to be monitoring the ongoing applicability of their umbrella fund?
I definitely think there is, in more than one way. So from an ongoing perspective, you need to be looking at what the investment options are that you've allowed your employees to have on that umbrella fund, if they're allowed a selection, and seeing whether those are still the right types of investments for them. You need to be looking at what the umbrella fund is offering from a cost effectiveness perspective, and also whether the offering is still relevant to your employees. So once you're in an umbrella fund, it doesn't mean that you are now there forever. You are able to switch from one umbrella fund to another if things change. And so from an employer perspective, you still have that responsibility to provide some oversight into what's being offered to your employees. You have elected that umbrella fund, and now you need to make sure that, because you are not auto-enrolling, but once you've elected an umbrella fund, your employees have to contribute. You need to make sure that what they're contributing to is relevant for those employees, this year, next year, 10 years' time. So yes, definitely, there's still that responsibility. I mean, there's also other responsibilities that you can never get rid of, like making sure that you're actually paying your contributions, that you're paying them on a timely basis when they're supposed to go, that you're providing all the information that the umbrella fund needs for those employees, so that when those people potentially leave your employ, that umbrella fund is still able to contact them and has the right information. So there are still a lot of responsibilities that the employer can't delegate, essentially, to that umbrella fund.
Mm. And in your experience, they would take care of those responsibilities by being appointed or elected onto the management committee for that umbrella fund, right? Okay.
So not for the umbrella fund. So obviously the umbrella fund has trustees, and then a participating employer can choose to have its own management committee. So it's not actually a legal requirement within the umbrella fund. It's something that an employer can choose to have as a participating employer. And it would be obviously relevant to their pot within that umbrella fund that they would then look at.
So, I was thinking of red flags that would pop up in this interaction with any umbrella fund that we may participate in. Is there a red flag? You talk about management committees not being a requirement. Is there a potential red flag if a fund doesn't have management committees in place?
A red flag for the employer if
Hmm.
they don't have a management committee in place. And
If
what's
the
going to
fund, if the
yeah.
sorry, if the umbrella fund doesn't allow for management committees.
Well, I mean, I think essentially you should be able to ask the umbrella fund to allow you to have a management committee. I mean, as an employer, you could have a management committee without the umbrella fund. You could have something internally and just ask the umbrella fund to report back to you and into that committee, for instance. Some umbrella funds will offer a formalized structure, some it'll be slightly less formalized. So I don't think that's necessarily a red flag. I think for me, a red flag would more be if you're not getting information out of your umbrella fund. So if you are asking for information and it's not forthcoming, if your employees are not being able to access the information that they want, if their statements or documentation is coming late, etc. I think those would kind of be more the red flags I'd be looking for. I think having a mandatory employee kind of management committee, some employers don't want that. They're small, they don't want to meet on a quarterly basis, etc. But there's the sense of responsibility from the employer side is still there. So you should have it. You should be asking for information. So it's not a red flag that you don't not required to have it. I think it's more a red flag if you're not getting from the umbrella fund what you need.
I mean, without getting too much into the controversial topic of fees, you touched on it earlier around the fees, and then that would be a consideration. And one of the comments that you raised in your article that we published was around the lack of a standard measure in the institutional space, whereas in the retail space on fees, there are these requirements and disclosures. Your comments or thoughts around the development of the industry into perhaps making these types of guidelines applicable?
So I think the problem that we have is there is a standard that's being used. So there's the retirement savings cost standard. The problem is that different umbrella funds are charging different fees. So some will charge their fees as a basis point fee of assets. Some will charge a fixed fee. Some charge a governance fee. Some might charge a fee somewhere else because you're accessing an asset manager that's not in their stable. Some might be charging you a fee for upgrades to systems that may not find its way into that RSC. So I think that's the difficulty when it comes to umbrella funds. In the retail savings space, I think the fees have become fairly standardized. Whereas in your retirement umbrella funds, there's a layering of fees that is often quite difficult to navigate your way through. And I think that's why it's often useful to have somebody like an employee benefit consultant who's dealt with a large number of these umbrella funds and has been unpacking these fees for a while, to be able to assist you in comparing the fees that you're being shown. Because different funds are classifying the fees, I think, in different areas. Or they're putting them within an investment fee and somebody else is putting it in an admin fee. And you're not quite sure, are you comparing apples with apples?
A wrap-up question. If I'm an employer watching this and I don't have a retirement fund for my staff, what would be the most convincing reason for me to provide these types of benefits for my employees?
I think from an employee value proposition, it's showing your employees that you actually care for them in a way that's not just, the day-to-day basis, but it's a long-term commitment. A retirement savings is a long-term thing. It's not a short-term today's savings. And this, I think, from an employer perspective, shows that you're considering the holistic employee, and you are assisting them in finding the best option that they can save for their retirement when they leave your employer. Now, we know that, not everybody is staying in the same employer for 25, 30 years anymore. But I still think it's important that you're showing that employee, even for the period that they are with you, that you are concerned for their long-term savings plans. And so that's why it's so relevant in being able to offer them something. Now, it might not be a standalone fund. It might not be an umbrella fund even. It might even be a group RA, because you might be quite a small employer and not be able to access an umbrella fund, because some of the umbrella funds do have minimum sizes of who they will take. And it might even be some other form of savings. It might even be a tax-free savings account that you're making available to them. And I think it also helps, especially where employees are not necessarily financially savvy, that you're assisting them on a pre-tax basis to be able to save.
Niki, it's been lovely chatting to you this morning. Thank you very much. Niki Giles, the Head of Strategy at Prescient Fund Services. Thank you for sharing your thoughts around umbrella funds with us.
Thanks very much, Natalie.